and the new things that are on our front door. Amen. Well, the Bible stands very high among the richest literatures of the world. But more times than not, I think we miss the most remarkable things in its pages. These jewels are right there in plain sight, but we're often looking for something else. We're predisposed to look for high theology or high drama, and so we miss the subtle moves and details that make it as powerful as it really is. At its best, I think the Bible does what Shakespeare is noted for doing, which is to hold up a mirror to nature in such a way that it challenges the reader to ask, could this be me? Those who are self-aware get an eyeful, and the rest, they walk on blind. Now, there are two amazing instances of this, I believe, in this morning's fascinating story, which Ashley read, half the book of Genesis practically. First, we're told that the sons of Jacob, 10 of Joseph's 11 brothers, put Joseph, the brother they're terribly jealous of, the one who got the fancy coat, in a pit. And then it says, they sat down and ate dinner. Did you get that in the first reading? It kind of went by quickly. Then they sat down and ate dinner. They do this unspeakable thing, and then they sit down to dinner while their brother Joseph is lying there just 10, 15 yards away, stunned, waiting to become dinner for some creature who makes the rounds of holes like this one after dark. They sit down in that, familiar family circle, and one of them says to another, Reuben, would you please pass me the pita and a few of Mom's pickled peppers? Well, this happens all the time. I got an email this week from Sojourners magazine. The title was, Who Would Jesus Cut from Medicaid? It said that 5.6 million people have been removed from the rolls just since February due to votes by mostly Christian, I almost said criminal, Christian state legislators. Many of the removed, of course, are children. The total this year will likely reach 15 million. And I'm guessing that most, if not all, of those legislators sat down that evening to a first-class Washington, D.C. dinner. And they went to church the next Sunday, and they bowed their heads in prayer and gave no thought to the people whose lives they worked so hard all week to crush. It's appalling. Of course, they consider themselves pro-life, except in the case of the lives of children who happen to have been born. Now, in the second part of the Joseph story that I want to highlight this morning is also something you can easily pass over too quickly. It's something that seems tangential until you read the whole saga of Joseph a second time and realize what an important hinge it is in the flow of events. It will seem a small thing, this thing. When isolated, Joseph is on an errand in the beginning of the story for his father. He is sent by his father out to locate his brothers, make sure they're okay, which is fairly ironic, right? He's about to go back home because he can't find them when a nameless man happens along and tells them that he overheard his brothers say that they were on their way to a place called Dothan. It's mentioned by name, Dothan, D-O-T-H-A-N. That's the piece of the puzzle I want you to note here. It's very small, as I said, almost consequential, but in reality, it makes all the difference in the world. Rabbi Lawrence Kushner put me onto this years ago at a seminar I attended. Kushner made a lot of the unnamed man in the story. He said, without him there would be no Joseph story. Joseph would not be thrown into the pit and then sold into slavery in Egypt. He would not have ended up in prison then in Egypt, if you remember that part of the story. He would not have then come to the attention of Pharaoh. He would not then have risen to a position of authority in Egypt where he would be able to rescue his people and the Egyptian people too from starvation during a famine that he, Joseph, saw coming. Without that unnamed man telling Joseph his brothers were over there in Dothan, there would not have been any Jews left alive in Egypt. And because of that, there would have been no Exodus, no Moses, no Israel, no King David, no Jerusalem, no Protestant Reformation, no Jesus, no Southminster Presbyterian Church, no Welcome Back Sunday. You'd be reading the paper. All because of one nameless man who said, I think I heard they said they were going over to Dothan. Okay, that's literature, right? That's also biblical history. But think about it for a minute. So many of the people who make the most profound difference to us in our little lives walk on to the stage of our life for only a moment or maybe an hour, and then they walk off it a minute later, never to be seen again. Then days or weeks or months or maybe years or decades later, we look back and we realize how important a part they played in our story. And we say, I didn't even catch her name. I didn't even catch her name. Only recently I saw how similar Joseph's story is to my own family's story. I'd never put this together before. My own great-great-grandmother, Catherine McGee, was born in 1834 in Derry, Northern Ireland. She married a man named William Boyd, and together they immigrated to Pennsylvania. And when gold fever struck her husband, he headed west, promising not to forget her. He promised also that he'd eventually send for her. Well, I know he wrote her at least one letter, because in it he enclosed a check for $50, quite a lot of money in 1850, I guess, drawn on a bank in San Francisco. But she couldn't cash it. I know this because I have the uncanceled check in my collection of family memorabilia. Well, at some point, she made her way with her only son, Charlie, to New York, where she boarded a ship and sailed down to the Isthmus of Panama, which the two of them crossed on muleback, dodging typhus along the way. They took another ship to San Francisco and then rode out to Grass Valley, where she spoke to a man who had heard a rumor that said that her husband, he thought, was now prospecting up near a town called Igo, west of Reading. He was just like the nameless man in the Joseph story who said, I think I heard they went over to Dothan. Well, she caught up with her husband, Bill, and then and there they picked up where they left off and expanded their family. And I was charmed by the story when I was first told it decades ago, and then I realized recently that, struck by the realization that but for her tenacity, I wouldn't even be here this morning. My great-great-grandfather, their next son, was the result of her finding her husband. Because this little woman would not accept abandonment and life in exile, but went alone to a new world, riding a mule, I am here. That is my heritage. And you know, it's also the heritage of everybody in this room. I mean, somewhere behind everybody is a Catherine McGee who would not allow life to steamroll her. And also, let's not forget the nameless person who pointed her somewhere when she came to a dead end, right? Now, besides that nameless man or woman who played a key role in our birth or survival, there's also, other nameless people who came into our lives mid-course, just for a moment, and changed its trajectory. Here's the story of one of those. Lynn in Illinois tells her own story of one such person. Again, somebody that we all have in our life. She says, I had left behind my boyfriend John in Boston to go to graduate school in Illinois. But I wrote him every day, worried he'd find someone new in my absence. Though I missed him, I was enjoying the respite from all the parties and weekend trips and sporting events he dragged me to. I was spending more time on things that nourished me, walks in the woods, needlework, foreign films. When the graduate program became overwhelming, I dropped out. But I stayed in the small college town for a while, reluctant to give up the picturesque life I had there. Finally, encouraged by John's emotional pleas to come back to him, I decided to return to Boston. I slid into a bus seat in St. Louis, feeling like a failure and not sure how I felt about John. I loved his deep brown eyes and playfulness and his moral integrity. He had the courage to speak the truth when others were afraid, so why wasn't I more eager to get back to him? I changed buses in New York City, and a studious-looking boy sat down next to me. He was going to graduate school in Boston, he said, and so was his fiancée. They enjoyed the same movies, took long walks in the woods together, told each other everything. My relationship with John seemed inadequate by comparison. I told the boy about my confusion, and he advised me to pay attention to how I felt the moment I saw John in the bus station. When I got off the bus in Boston, John was waiting on a bench, looking tired and sloppy. His hair was too long, his shirt tail was hanging out, and when he greeted me, he seemed awkward and unsure. I felt the same way. At the apartment, we argued. I wanted to wait tables for a while. John thought I should use my degree to become a professional something he wasn't himself. He was beginning to seem less moral and more judgmental. In the days that followed, he watched sports and got together with his friends. I tagged along, but something was missing. The boy on the bus, I didn't even know his name, had taught me to pay attention to what I felt. A year later, I moved back to Illinois alone. The nameless boy on the bus alerted her, made all the difference in the world. How many people have helped us on a bus? How many people have we helped on a bus or a train or an airplane or who knows where? And we'll never know it. And who did you meet when you were in a vulnerable place in your life, flailing about, maybe very young, unsure how to resolve something big you knew wasn't right, but you couldn't quite find the key you needed to get through a new door? None of us is everything to ourselves. There are these invisible lines of connection between us and others running right through the aisles of this church and from here to every place on the globe. You hardly ever see these lines, but the air is thick with them. Fate, providence. Do you believe in this? Some people believe that there are no chance encounters. A fateful rendezvous occurs, and how did that happen? Two people got up that morning with no expectation, no idea what might cross their path that day, but one of them was mightily in need of some guidance, and the other was being ready to be a very special messenger. As I said earlier, this story of Joseph isn't just a story, it's a saga. That is, it's a series of stories strung together the way all of our lives are composed of a series of strung together stories. Here's what I mean. If you sat down and wrote down a chronological account of your life, and then read it back slowly and thoughtfully and revised it to make sure you got it right, you would, I imagine, see how you might impose a kind of order to it. You would see definite chapters. You'd see clear beginnings and endings that have a certain logic to them, right? Trust me, you would. Now, here's something else you would see if you took the time to do this. You would see, as those who have read the story of Joseph from beginning to end see, that the further you go along in life, the less sure you might be about whether particular things that happen along the way are good things or bad things. That changes as you get older. If it doesn't, you aren't paying attention. Whether they're the result of good luck or bad luck, right? Well, of course, when tragic things happen, and they do sometimes, they're easy to identify as bad, and they usually stay bad. But some transitions, job losses, career promotions or demotions, moving to a new town, the end of a relationship, every one of those can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how it all plays out and what it leads to, or what it might teach you about life or about yourself. I want to close with a famous Chinese fable I imagine you've heard before. See if you remember it. A farmer's horse runs off. Neither he nor his son can catch this horse. His neighbor says, "How bad for you?" The farmer says, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Next day, the horse returns with a mare, a beautiful wild mare. The neighbor says, how good for you. Now you have 2 fine horses. And again, the farmer says, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Well, the next day, the farmer's son tries to tame this new wild mare. And in the process, he's thrown and he breaks his leg very badly. And the neighbor's response is, how bad for you. Such sorrow. And the farmer, with tears in his eyes this time, says, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Next day, the army comes through town and conscripts the neighbor's 2 sons against their will and leaves the farmer's son, who has the day before broken his leg. The neighbor, through his own tears, says, how lucky you are, you still have your son. And the farmer says, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Which he has to say, right? Because this is a story without an ending, because our lives are so infinitely complex. But we don't always act as if we know this. We look at the state of our life today and count up our regrets and blessings, maybe a little too early, almost always a little too early. Some people, are trapped by regret for years, decades, a lifetime. Oh, if only that one thing had worked out differently, we might say. Or if only I had made a different choice back when I was 21. It is so much better when we are gentle with ourselves about such things. It is so much better when we are patient about the unfolding of our own personal sagas. Well, before I say amen, I see you moving in place, you music people. Think first. Let me take a moment to invite you to meditate a moment. Think of something that happened in your life that at the time seemed to you to be, really bad, or maybe even the end of the world. Maybe it seemed that way because, you were very young and life hadn't yet opened up for you. So can you go back to that time, when things just were so fraught? And then you think, because it played out the way it did, something else, maybe something quite wonderful at least more appropriate to you, was given room to happen. Think about the life you might have had if that hadn't happened. Now think about something a little closer to you in time that you might feel badly about even now. Is it possible that that thing might open a new door you haven't yet considered? Amen.